Good afternoon, Rector and distinguished audience. I'm very glad that you invited me to come here. In the Netherlands we have a form of democracy which is based on consultation with all relevant stakeholders, and it happens all the time in higher education too. But I can't remember that we have ever had a meeting like this, where almost everybody who counts in higher education is present. And so I hope to learn maybe more from you than you from me. But we'll see about that. My expertise is basically in impact evaluation of research and in innovation policy. And so I will talk mainly about higher education in terms of the research component and in terms of the relation with innovation. But I will also refer to education at times because the three are clearly closely related, or at least they should be. My perspective is maybe a bit different than Peter's perspective. I work for the Dutch Academy, and this is an academy that regards all research fields, so not only the natural sciences and medicine, but also humanities and social sciences. And I myself am part of the time working for the fields of humanities, which is in these times a very, at least in the Netherlands, I don't know how it is here, a very difficult field, almost an endangered species, because there is a lot of focus on what research can do for the economy. And for some reason, people think that maybe humanities can do not so much for the economy. I was very glad to see that the rector told us that at least one of the four departments in the university was a philosophical department. I think it's very, very important to reflect on the current developments for a number of reasons that I will explain. So I'm going to talk, and sorry my voice is a bit scratchy because of a slight cold. I'm going to talk about these topics. First about the context of what I call HERE systems, higher education, research and innovation. And then about some of the grand challenges that I see for these systems. I will give you a short overview of what happened in Dutch science policy or in Dutch higher education policy over the last 30 years, because I think many of the issues will sound familiar to a Finnish audience. And I think, I will come back to that a little later, that there's a lot of similarities between Finland and the Netherlands. Maybe you wouldn't think so, but I found lots of similarities. So I will also compare the two countries for a little bit on certain characteristics, socio-economic and higher education. And then I will discuss some of the challenges that I see in this time. And I will end with a short overview of the Dutch solution, the current Dutch solution for all these challenges. It's very fresh and recent because it was only presented 3 weeks ago by the Ministry of Education and Sciences together with the Ministry of Economic Affairs. This is also an interesting development. There is kind of a battle, prestige battle between these two ministries about who is having the prime responsibility for the development of the higher education and innovation system. And finally, I will say something about future options. I also have to say that I promised to present a paper. The paper is not finished yet. One of the reasons is that I wanted to hear what was going to happen this afternoon. I think that can be an important input. But the other reason is that this very recent idea of the ministry, which I will come back to later, will give me the opportunity to reflect on that. In the Academy we started an internet forum, just at the moment that as the minister presented her proposals. And there are already many people, especially researchers, reacting to the plans of the minister, and I wanted to use those discussions also as input for the paper. I want to start with a question, by the way. How many researchers are in the room? I don't see any. I see, luckily, a few fingers, because my perspective is a bit mixed. I work as an advisor for the Dutch Academy, but I'm also a researcher myself. Being in the Academy means that you talk all the time to researchers and they reflect on all these developments. So part of what I'm going to say is based on discussions with these people from the universities and from academic institutions. Okay. What are the most important movements, most important developments in the context of higher education, research and innovation? Peter already mentioned Helga Novotny. Before she was called to important European functions, she wrote a book together with Michael Gibbons and a few other people that was quite influential in the mid-90s, and it was called The New Production of Knowledge. And I won't go into details there, but what they saw in this book was that academic research was giving way to a different type of research. They refer to it as transdisciplinary research or research in the context of application. But you see that in a lot of institutions that the traditional academic research is in competition with new forms of research. Part of the cause of that is that a lot of the financing is now coming from external resources, industry, public organizations, of course from European funds, and they have always certain kind of demands that are not necessarily the demands that you would have for traditional academic research. So there is also, and in particular in this current Horizon 2020 program, there's a big shift from national funding to European funding. National fundings has been referred to already by the minister, are in trouble in a lot of countries, and there is also in the Netherlands the message to the universities: you don't have to count on more money because we don't have it. What you can do is shift funds around and try to prioritize certain fields, but there's not going to be extra money. Universities, and if I say universities, I also mean the universities of applied sciences, they have to deal with that. Then there is this shift from disciplinary research to MIT research, and I don't mean that famous institute in Boston, but I mean multi, inter and transdisciplinary research. And this calls also in education for a different kind of education, or at least trying to teach your students not only to be good in the field they have chosen, but also be open to other fields and investigate options for collaboration. Then there is the open access, open science, open innovation. These are all somehow linked. This is influencing, I think, the institutions in higher education in a tremendous way. And it could even mean that the institutions will change in the next decade or so from the institutions we know now, these nice buildings, and people coming there in the morning and starting to read the newspaper before the professor comes to tell his story or her story, to all kind of forms of distant learning. Maybe we don't need all these expensive buildings anymore, which is a shame because some of them are really nice. But anyway, so there will be changes. The whole institutional structure, and there's other reasons for that too, is going to change, I think. And then there is, and that's related to that, a shift from the traditional orientation on books and on classrooms and on discussions in classrooms to distant reading and learning. And this means, one of the things at least, that also people who don't have a college degree or don't have finished their secondary education can start following these courses and participate in discussions. So it's, in a way, it's a process of democratization that is taking place. And finally, there is a shift, at least in the Netherlands, but I think you can see that in other European countries too, a shift from higher education policy to industry policy. I'm not sure how this is exactly in Finland, but in the Netherlands there is really a strong battle between two ministries, the Ministry of Economic Affairs and the Ministry of Research and Higher Education. At this moment, and it was installed by the previous government, the Ministry of Economic Affairs has the prime responsibility for higher education policy, which may sound kind of strange, but this has to do with another development called top sectors, and I will come back to that in a moment. Anyways, maybe the next step will be that we will have a policy for the knowledge society, which not only entails economic affairs, but also social-cultural development. What does these changes in the context, what do they mean for the institutions, the higher education and research and innovation institutions? Well, one of the things is that I see a growing tension between basic and applied research and between block grant and competitive financing. In the Netherlands, just to give an overall figure, there used to be a relation between the funding for academic research and external funding that was about 2/3 and 1/3. But now in most institutions it is 50-50 or even 60-40, 60 for external. And in some departments in the technical universities especially, it is almost 80 or 90%. So for instance, all the PhD students are financed by external funding, which is not bad in essence, but it can lead to a different kind of dissertations and a different kind of orientation of students, and in particular in the medical fields we get a lot of complaints that it also affects the quality of the dissertations, and then it's of course not a good thing. There's also a growing tension between specialization and generalization, and that is both in research and education. Just a few weeks ago there was a big turmoil in the University of Amsterdam because the faculty of humanities got into financial trouble, and there was a whole history of different causes. I won't go into that. But there was also a fierce debate then about what should be the solution, whether we could still go on the way we did and just have to figure out how to solve the financial problem, or that we should go into a totally different mood. And the people who thought of the last solution, they were looking for, and I'm sure you have that here too, for a new structure where you have broad bachelors and where you bring in all kind of languages, for instance. Scandinavian languages are very endangered in this faculty, into a broad program. And of course the people who don't like this solution are afraid that you will lose quality and expertise in these fields if you bring it all into broad bachelors. Then there is a growing tension between research and education. I'm sure you will have that same problem here. And that has to do with the kind of financing in Dutch universities that is traditionally based on student numbers. So if you see it in a very simple way, if you have lots of students, you have lots of money to do research. But in a lot of student-intensive faculties, like the humanities and social sciences, people have to do so much teaching that they hardly have any time for research. On the other hand, if you are in a natural science faculty, you don't have so many students, because like the Finns, we are a service economy, so most students are in humanities and social sciences. And but you do need lots of money for research, because you need equipment and facilities and laboratories, which the humanities faculties don't need necessarily, although things are changing with the ICT, of course. Anyways, these are challenges for any institution, I think. I won't go into the ICT now, because that is, I think, very global challenge for almost everybody. The big data problem is something that in the Netherlands we have now 2 separate institutes that not only organize the data in a way that it makes it easy for researchers to communicate with each other, but they also think in terms of international collaboration and in terms of European funding for large programs. So I think this is really an issue that, and certainly in small countries, that makes sense to pool resources together and not leave it to individual universities. Then there are a lot of productive interactions, as I like to refer to it, between universities and industry, between universities and public organizations. And this all has to do, of course, with the transition from academic research to research that is more oriented towards societal issues and questions. But it's not something that many people are used to in academia. So it's something that really takes a lot of time and effort to develop arrangements that will satisfy all the participating stakeholders. And I've been involved in a number of developments in this area. And I can tell you on the one hand that it is very difficult, especially in the beginning, but on the other hand, if you organize it in a certain way where you make an effort for these different stakeholders to meet with each other and to work on a common agenda, you can get surprisingly far. Well, I've talked about this ongoing struggle between the 2 ministries, and in the Netherlands at this moment the Ministry of Economic Affairs is indeed in the lead, but I think with the current plan of the Ministry of Education and Sciences they might win some terrain back. And then of course there is the growing international collaboration. It's not only referred to the European programs, important of course for both Finland and the Netherlands and for all European countries, but it's also because there are indeed these very big international problems, and of course there are it's easy to refer to the climate program, for instance, the IPCC, but there are a lot of other issues that need international collaboration. I'm now only thinking of the Ebola crisis, and it's well known that whatever system you have in our countries, Ebola is not high on the agenda. At the moment that it becomes a possible threat for just one Ebola patient that came back to the United States, and there was a public debate about what to do about this, and if we couldn't get some research funding to find a cure for the Ebola. So that's how you see how the world is indeed interconnected, and it's very important to develop these international collaborations, not at the time that it is deemed necessary, but even before that. By the way, I still have a lot of slides, and I don't mind at all if you want to interrupt me for asking questions. I know we can have a debate later, but maybe if you want to stop me, don't hesitate. This is, after all these grand movements and challenges, what does it come down to in a few simple lines? And I know that this is just a small selection, because there's lots more. For the education, I think that there's something that some people refer to as the 21st century skills. What they exactly are, that differs from article to article, or from paper to paper, or from presentation to presentation. But I think that it basically refers to the fact that things are going in a much faster pace than they used to go, and that let's say the number of more routine-like tasks is diminishing, and that we expect a different attitude from people who leave higher education institutions. And that is not so much that they are very good in one particular subject, but that they have a mindset that is able to cope with a fast-changing world. And so they should be very much open to, for instance, other disciplines, not only academic disciplines, also to other expertise, and open to issues that concern society. And I think in a way the same thing goes for research. They should, of course, be very good in their own field, but they should also develop a broader interest and a broader orientation to other fields and other expertise. And they also will have to cope with controversies, because there's a lot of fields where input from science, from research is needed, but it also causes often a lot of controversy in society. And one of the issues, I'm not sure that it is playing in Finland, but in the Netherlands and in a number of other countries, there is now a fierce debate about shale gas. And the debate is about the risks of earthquakes because of the way they try to drill that gas. Also contamination because the chemicals they use. And of course the other side is that it can be good for the economy if we are a country that doesn't have oil, but we do have natural gas, but at some point that is going to be over, and this would be a nice solution. So it's a very complex discussion, but that is the reality of today. You cannot stay in your ivory tower anymore. And then innovation, I think my main message there is that the focus should not only be on technological innovation. There's an institute in Rotterdam that makes a yearly calculation of the ratio between technological innovation and social innovation. And the last few years, it is about 75% social innovation and 25% technological innovation. And social innovation, of course, refers to the fact that we because of all kinds of developments, ICT again, but other developments too, are in a process of reorganizing the way we do things in society, the way we organize work, the way we organize schools, the way we organize research, etc., etc. And so also in economies like the Finnish and the Dutch, we are both mainly service economies. It's very important to focus on social innovation. And of course, the connection between these three is going to be much more interesting and much more dynamic than it has been in the past. So I'll give you a short overview of a gradual shift in policy goals in the Netherlands. And I think it's been mentioned before by Peter that the Netherlands are doing very well in international rankings. The Netherlands universities, they're all but one, I think, in the top 200 of most of these rankings. And I'm not a ranking person, let me say that. But I think it does say something. And I think the main reason is that already in the 1980s, we started with a kind of a serious national evaluation of research. And this coincided with a huge reorganization, which costed I think about 2,000 jobs in the university sector. And I think it's always difficult to say, but I think that helped to improve Dutch research in the sense that there was an orientation growing on international collaboration and international publication. And also, I think let's say the bottom 10 or 20% was cut off, and that's a hard thing to say, but I think a lot of these people, they were in the university without being very productive, neither in teaching and research. In the 1960s and 70s that was possible it had a nice side, but it was also very costly and not so effective. Then in the 1990s, there was the first attempt to organize research and PhD education on a national level. Like Finland, we are a small country, and we have sort of an ongoing discussion whether we should have separate autonomous universities or that they should collaborate and coordinate their research effort and their teaching efforts. For instance, between Amsterdam and Leiden and Utrecht, there is about 30 or 40 kilometers. All students in the Netherlands have free transportation during the week. So I don't think they would mind going from Amsterdam to Leiden once a week or so. But apparently that is something that has to be pushed by policy, because the universities are very fond on their autonomy. Anyways, that movement started in the 1990s, and also the first public-private partnerships as part of the innovation policy that started then appeared, especially in Wageningen, which has an agricultural university. And there was the first attempt to create the Wageningen Food Valley, something else than Silicon Valley. But it has, after 2 decades, resulted in a very prestigious university. If you look at the rankings for, let's say, agricultural or food-related topics. Then in the first decade of this century, the innovation policy started to focus more and more and pushing universities to reorient their programs into the direction of a number of what they were called key areas. And these key areas were established by the ministry. There was a council with the Prime Minister as a chairperson. and all the stakeholders from industry, from higher education, from other organizations participated in this platform, and there was a number of important sectors established for the Dutch economy, and there was an let's say an attempt to have universities focus their research on these key areas. Wasn't so successful for a number of reasons, but it was a start. And then in 2003 we became really serious with the evaluation of research. I said it. We started in the 1980s. What I didn't say was that that after a few years that wasn't really so successful. It helped in the first couple of years, but the idea that on the basis of these quality evaluations you would be able to reallocate money to let's say the best performing institutes was somehow never accomplished, and I think it was mainly because the universities didn't want to have that, because it means that you have to give your money to another university, and I don't think many universities are happy to do that. Rather, they put an effort in improving their own research, which is also not a bad idea, of course. The policy of national coordination was presented with the keywords focus and mass. And what they refer to was that on the one hand, and this is, I think, sort of a continuum in Dutch policy, higher education and research policy over the last 3 decades. What they wanted was, now they refer to it as a high plane, so the overall level of Dutch universities should be very high. And then you should have some focal areas, some priority areas that are even higher, that are excellent. And this is all in the world scale, because the ambition of the Dutch ministry is to be in the top 5 of the world with our higher education and research system. And that is a pretty high ambition for a small country. But according to certain rankings, we are at least in the top 10. But according to these rankings, Finland is doing pretty well also. So what it exactly means, that's another question. Anyways, it became really serious in 2010. The name Veerman, that's the guy who chaired a committee that looked into Dutch higher education systems, and his conclusion was that overall it was very good, but there could be more differentiation. So his critique was that most universities did more or less the same areas, and within these areas also more or less the same choices, which, for instance, in some fields led to a very strong focus on particular topics and not on other topics. One example that I remember from a discussion was the medical field, and I don't know if it's very different in other countries, but the main fields that were successful and got resources were in cancer and heart disease. And a lot of other important fields, COPD was one of the examples, got less and less funding, but more people suffered from these kind of illnesses than from the cancer and the heart disease. And so that's very strange, and one of the reasons was that it is much easier to get your publications in these last 2 fields in high impact journals than in the first, and so you score higher and you get more money. This is a very simple type of reasoning, but that is in the background of the discussions that Mr. Veerman pushed in the Netherlands. So his idea was that the universities should be more different from each other. Each university should ideally have 2 or 3 or 4 main focal points, and then talk to the other universities, and they should, at a national level, have cover the whole spectrum of things that are important, but they should be more different. And they should also be more selective. This is also an interesting discussion, and I'm sure that you have that too. On the one hand, if you want to be of good quality, you have to be selective, because some people are better than others, and so there is a competition on getting the best students. Not only in the Netherlands, we also try to attract people from outside the Netherlands. But that, of course, is in conflict with the fact that you want to be a knowledge economy or a knowledge society, and that means that you want as much people following higher education and possibly research as possible. There is a policy goal that the Netherlands should have 50% or more people from the tertiary education in 1930, I think. And that's a high ambition. So how do you deal with that as an institution? Okay, how much time do we have?
Well, a few minutes. Actually, I decided we can use the half an hour from 17:30.
Okay.
To discussion 2. So no problem.
Okay, so I'll skip a few slides then, because let's see where we are. I think what I will do is, that's probably the most interesting thing, to finish with something that happened very recently, and that is the plan of the government to have a national science agenda. And this has been done in a number of other countries, Denmark, for instance, and Switzerland, Ireland, I think. The idea is that by the fall of 2015, in the Netherlands we have a national science agenda that entails basically all the ideas that we have and all the policies that we have had in the previous 5 years or so. I did mention very briefly the top sector policy, this idea that there is the best way to support the economy in the long term is to have a good collaboration between academics, industry, public organizations, and the politicians like to refer to this as the golden triangle. I mentioned these key sectors for the Dutch economy. There is a number of also key sectors. They call them now top sectors. It's a little bit different than the key sectors, but it doesn't matter. These are sectors that are deemed important for the Dutch economy, and each sector has a team of 4 people coming from industry, from the universities, from public organizations, and from small and medium-sized firms, and they have to write up a program, of course in consultation with the people in those sectors. That is one of the major operations of the last 2 or 3 years. What is happening there should be part of this agenda. But also, for instance, in the academy, we have made our own agenda together with the research community in the Netherlands. And there are in this agenda 50 topics that are scientifically promising and have some impact on societal problems in all fields. The universities have a list of priorities, etc., etc. So all these things have to come together in this national agenda. At the same time, the ministry said that is the basis for this national agenda, but we want a few very strong topics, maybe 6 or so, or 8, which is almost an impossible task. We have about a year to fix that. And the process has just started with a white paper coming from the the Ministry of Education and Sciences and the Ministry of Economic Affairs. I told you about the battle that's going on between these two, and so it's going to be very interesting to see what will happen in this development of a Dutch science agenda. And the ministry gave 3 chapters in this white paper, and these are the titles of these 3 chapters. So it starts with Dutch science of worldwide significance. So we are not, we don't have modest politicians, but to a certain extent it is true, because we indeed are doing very well in the rankings. And the second thing, science with maximum impact, that refers to these top sectors, meaning that you solve what has been referred to as the knowledge paradox, which means that we have excellent science, but it doesn't trickle down enough to the economy. And the idea is that because you bring these different parties, the different stakeholders together, you will find ways to get the best results of science to the best companies that stimulate the economy. And then the third thing is Dutch science as a breeding ground for talent. And that has to do with the fact that the ministry sees that there is a sort of an international competition going on for the best students. And so they want advice on how to create new options for higher education institutions to be very attractive for foreign students. Because foreign students have lots of choices. They can go to the United States or Germany or Finland or any other country. And why would they choose the Netherlands? So, I don't know how much time I have, Chairman. Okay, I just say a few things about Finland and the Netherlands, because I think we can really, and I will come back to this in my paper, we can really compare the two countries in a lot of ways. And so, for the sake of time, I won't go too much into these details, but like I said, in a number of ways, the economies look alike in a number of respects. Of course, there are differences too. You are very big in forestry, we are very big in agriculture, although not as big as some people think. But for instance, the per capita income are pretty much the same. We don't make the same kind of investments always, but there are some differences in the geography. Politics and I think society are pretty similar. And I think also in the ambitions of both countries there's a lot of similarities. And I looked at, I'm just going to finish a bit with on a light note then, if you allow me. I looked at the Harvard Atlas of Economic Complexity, and this is a picture of the Dutch export. Now you would think that we are an oil country, but of course we are only a transit country. We have one of the biggest harbors in the world, and so there's a big petrochemical industry there, and that's why it's so big in our country. But then we have a lot of ICT-related industry, and there's a lot of medical-related industry. There is agriculture, of course, and this is the Finnish export according to that same atlas. And of course there are clear differences. The red block on the bottom is paper and paper related industries. Well, we don't have that at all. But a lot of these, you can see it in the colors, a lot of these sectors are pretty similar. And the fact that we look alike is hopefully a reason to inspire each other for the future of our higher education and research. And even the Chinese know that we look alike, because these are the names translated into English of the Chinese for the European countries. And both Finland and the Netherlands have the name of an orchid. So we are pretty unique flowers in the eyes of the Chinese. Now, I had lots of more to say, but I think we save that for the discussion then. Thank you.